Celebrations now, come on. Why am I so happy? Why could I be so happy? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because my book, The Gallipoli Evacuation, is now available to buy. Hooray! Forget all that and pre-ordering, forget all that. You can actually buy it. You can buy it all over the world through the wonders of the internet. You can pay in a wide range of currencies, and all you have to do is go to our website, which is livinghistoryytv.com. livinghistoryytv.com. You know it makes sense. Buy today.
A Living History production.
I'm Peter Hart, and for the last 40 years I've interviewed thousands of veterans about their experience of war. Join me on a journey through the pages of history. Welcome to Peter Hart's Military History.
Hi, and welcome to Gary Bain's Military History Podcast.
Hooray!
I'm joined today by my good friend Peter Hart.
Arnold.
Morning, Peter. Now, what are we doing today?
Well, today we're doing the Hellas diversion, Gary, which was to distract attention away from the great Australian breakout from Anzac on the night of the 6th of August, 6th, 7th, 8th of August, that period. This was suggested to us by a friend of ours, wasn't it, Gary?
Yeah, it was suggested to us by Jim Grundy, who's a great supporter of the podcast. He regularly downloads, shares, and most of all, he subscribes. It was his suggestion, and he sent us through a few helpful notes.
He did. One particular, he discovered a quote by Private David Melling, which is we used to sew the podcast together. Jim Grundy runs a couple of great Facebook pages, which we absolutely recommend. One's called Gallipoli. Gallipoli 1915, fantastic. And the other one is the greatest title in the history of the world, Small Town, Great War, or is it Great War, Small Town? I never remember which way around. Fantastic sites. He runs a range of sites, and he's also got a book coming out. It's been delayed by COVID, but it's called Hell and Confusion, Gallipoli, day by day. Ah.
Is he Australian?
No, he's from Nottingham.
Oh, yeah, I could tell by that great accent.
Well, anyway, and so watch out for that, because I'm sure it will be great. A lot of you will be familiar with Jim's work particularly on the Gallipoli 1915 Facebook page, which is the best source of entertainment and information about Gallipoli that's freely available. So what we're going to do is discuss how the British 8th Army Corps launched a couple of diversionary attacks at Hellas on the 6th and 7th of August. What were conditions like at August? You're in charge of the podcast today, so I'll let you take the lead somewhat. What was happening in the summer? What's going on? Since there'd been the three battles of Krithia, there'd been the attack of the 28th of June, there'd been the attacks on the 12th, 13th of July. What's happening?
Well, you'll be surprised to learn that the sun was blazing down in August. You know, it's incredibly hot. The trench systems had been developed so that they were pretty much a rival to anything on the Western Front by that stage. They were faced by redoubts, certainly in front of Krithia. The reserve line trenches snaked all the way along the contours of Achibaba, so the enemy had started to get its act together by that stage. They had been restocked. It's a phrase that was used, but they were still suffering from the ammunition shortage, particularly around artillery ammunition. And you'll be really surprised to learn that the initial plans were remarkably similar to the disastrous attacks that had been made on the 12th and 13th of July.
Well, in one way, we use this as a criticism a lot. Both of us do. But the thing is, there's two things here. What else could they do? There's no room. It's only about 3 mile front. you're just going to have to batter your way through. And what they're doing is, when we said restocked is a terrible phrase, I'm amazed you used that phrase, Gary.
Yes, it was because you told me to.
Yeah, and so I can stamp you down. And when by restock, it means that some people had arrived, some new fresh
so we've got some fresh troops in. Yeah.
So the 88th, there was going to be 2 attacks. One's by the 88th Brigade. This is part of the 29th Division. And this 29th Division, do you think it's got much in common with the 29th Division that landed on the 25th of April?
Not by this stage, no.
They've changed personnel a couple of times by this time. They've been, as you charmingly put it, restocked.
Yeah.
Ready for the next attack. And they were going to attack on the 6th of August along Fir Tree Spur. Okay? Fir Tree Spur. We'll put a map up for you. It's the usual thing.
So that's north of Crithianulla, isn't it?
Yeah, that's spot on. And they're going to attack on the 6th of August. Next day, the 125th and 127th Brigades of 42nd Division are going to attack along Krithia Spur. They hadn't been quite so much restocked, to be absolutely honest. They're going to attack on Krithia Spur and in Crithianulla, that area around there. That's what they're going to do. And the idea was to pinch out the Turkey, later on, the salient created between them. But the ludicrous thing is, and this is, you can't understand, at 8th Army Corps headquarters, Major General William Douglas is in temporary command. Now, I know you're interested in why he's in temporary command, because he wasn't the original commander, and you're not fond of the original commander. I don't think you think he's stupid, because you're not stupid.
No, not at all.
But you're not fond of him, and nor am I. But who is the original commander that's gone?
Well, Hunter Weston had returned to England. He was effectively relieved on the 23rd of July, suffering sunstroke, I think, is what it was described at.
It is serious sunstroke.
Well, you and I had a slight debate about that.
Yeah, we're not sure.
Whether or not, it would be severe enough for you to return to England. But there were witnesses to him and the condition he was in, and he was described as being flaky and wobbly on his feet. So we'll give him the benefit of the doubt. He'd suffered and was returned to England. And, of course, he later was posted out to the Western Front.
I think you pointed out, why wasn't he sent back to Imbros or
there were hospital facilities more locally, but he was sent back to England.
Maybe he had something else wrong, dysentery or something. I'm not quite sure. But we're going to do a podcast on Hunter Weston, and we will return to this subject. A lot of people try and make out that he was just relieved of command.
No, he was unwell.
He was unwell, yeah. So Major General William Douglas is in temporary command with Brigadier General Street, pending the arrival of Hunter Weston's replacement, who was Lieutenant General Sir Francis Davis, Joey Davis. Now, these people somehow managed to assume they're going to be successful.
Well, why not? I mean, following 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and I think we established up to 57th Brithia in a previous podcast. Why wouldn't you be?
Why wouldn't you be? What could go wrong in attacking these 3 sets of Turkish lines and the strengthened redoubts? Oh, nothing could go wrong. I think this is absolute madness, and there is no justification for their optimistic mood. And this is not us attributing optimism to them. There are accounts, there are documentation where they are very optimistic that they will break through. Madness. Now, here's a quote from, this is the one that was found for us by Jim Grundy, our favourite. This is by Private David Melling. He was with the 1st 8th Battalion, Lancashire Fusiliers, 42nd Division. Fine body of men, I think you'd say, Gary.
Fine body of men.
So, give us this quote, Gary.
We were in a Turkish communication trench, digging it wider, and we came across all sorts of queer things. We dug a dead Turk up, a chap without a head, and near him we dug up one of our shortly Enfield rifles. He had equipment on, and when we looked into his pouches, we found that he had some of our ammunition, besides his own. We supposed from the look of things that he had been knocked over by a shell and buried in the rubbish. We were throwing the earth out and making the trench deeper when we came across the Turk's head. One chap got it on a shovel and fired it over the top of the parapet. You got used to digging bodies up. It was nothing to strike one with your pick or shovel. All this experience was good for us and got us used to fighting before we were actually in it.
That quote gives you an idea of how they were becoming numbed to what's going on, to the horror of their surroundings. The next quote's also going to be read by you. This is how almost it becomes a routine, a dull and boring routine. Within all the fact you're going to get killed at any moment, possibly. And this is Second Lieutenant Hugh Hayward of the 1st 6th Manchester Regiment, 127 Brigade, 42nd Division.
Our existence here has been more monotonous than anything I've ever endured before. We've been stuck in the same place, in the same trenches, doing the same thing. Nothing. Our programme every day is as follows. 3 a.m, stand to till 4 a.m. Then sleep again, if the flies will let you, till 8 a.m, when you rouse up again and prepare for one's breakfast at about 8:15. Breakfast has to be rushed, otherwise the flies get too numerous in the vicinity of the jam. After breakfast, you settle down as comfortably as you can and start to do nothing, interrupted at 10:20 by inspecting your platoon lines. But once that is done, you can really get going and go on doing nothing till 8 p.m, with short interruptions for food.
My erstwhile employers, the War Museum, would say this closely resembled my normal working day. And indeed, my charming child bride, Polly, would say it's how I am normally. There'd be a flurry every so often of action. I mean, this is just trench holding, snipers, the rest of it. And if you want to know more about conditions at Gallipoli, then I advise you to listen to our podcast, Conditions at Gallipoli. That was on Peter Hart's military history podcast rather than Gary Bain's military history podcast. But they're very closely linked, I think you'll find. Now, this is a quote. There's the odd vicious skirmishes. They're just trying to improve their position, just fiddling about. And this is Lieutenant Charles Lister. And again, listen to our one of our earlier podcasts on the poets and glitterati. He's in that. He's in a skirmish over some disputed barricade. I'll just read you this. He was with the Hood Battalion, RND. The artillery shelled the advanced Turkish post for about 20 minutes while we massed with a covering party of men with bombs and bayonets and a main body of men with sandbags in the trench, ready to rush out up the old communication trench and push our sandbag barrier still further forward. So that's all they're trying to do, is push up a communication trench. He goes on to say, we realised the importance of rushing in immediately our shelling ceased. But as it turned out, we were rather too close, for a shell fell among our people and buried 6 of them, who were, however, dug out unhurt or only slightly wounded. The shell luckily did not burst. This was followed by a Turkish shell which fell right in the middle of us as we were all crouching for the rush. Hit Freiberg in the stomach, that's Bernard Freiberg, killed another man and wounded me with small scratches which bled profusely at the moment. We had by now got to our original barrier, so I got our covering party out and rushed them up the trench over quite a number of dead Turks. We stopped our men just short of the Turkish advance post, threw bombs, and at once started the new barrier. It means building up a new barrier. Not a Turk in sight. The snipers, however, soon came back and made work at this point difficult, so we moved back and contented ourselves with a gain of about 40 or 50 yards on our old position. I have been hit in about 6 places, but all tiny little scratches. He was actually, though, wounded, and he was evacuated for medical treatment. This was his 2nd wound. The 3rd wound, about when he came back again, was the one that did for him. The 8th Corps is getting nowhere fast at this rate. So why they thought that suddenly another attack would be a success, I don't know. So let's get on to the first diversionary attack on the 6th of August. Friday, the 6th of August. Lucky for some, perhaps. Not for the Turks, perhaps. The attack would be supported by the 1st 5th Manchesters, who would their role was to protect the right. So the 88th Brigade, that's Lancashire Fusiliers, are attacking, and the 88th Brigade, which is the 29th Division, are making the attack. The 1st 5th Manchesters are to their side, providing covering machine gun fire. So the British bombardment opened at 20 past 2, 14:20 in your terms, Gary, because I know you like things done properly. But the Turkish response was immediate. They'd been expecting the attack, hadn't they, Gary? And this is 2nd Lieutenant Hugh Hayward again. He's with the machine guns, providing covering fire for the 29th Division.
Our own bombardment started, and I've never seen or heard or smelt anything like it. The shells were bursting wherever you looked. There was a hellish din, and over all a dense cloud of pungent, sickly yellow smoke, through which nothing could be seen distinctly. Bits of shell were flying about in every direction, either from Turkish shells or from the blowback from ours. This went on for nearly 2 hours.
So there's the British bombardment and the Turkish counter-bombardment going on. It's very interesting. Joey Davis had turned up by this time, Lieutenant General Francis Davis, to give him his Sunday name. And he'd come fresh from service on the Western Front. And it's just interesting. This is such a big bombardment to Hugh Hayward, isn't it, as you just described. He said he was horrified at the total inadequacy of the British bombardment. That's because shelling at Gallipoli is nothing compared to 1915 shelling on the Western Front, which in turn, of course, is nothing compared to 1916 and vice, as the years went on.
Yeah, but even then, in 1915, on the Western Front, it's measured in thousands and thousands of shells, and as you rightly say, soon it'd be millions of shells, and there was just no comparison with what was happening in Gallipoli.
Yeah, I mean, here we're talking about hundreds of shells at most. So the barrage is, in military terms, totally unfit for purpose. And when the infantry go over, 29th Division go over at 1550, this is what Hugh Hayward saw.
All the line on the left to the Krithia Nullah got over the parapet and went for the Turks. As soon as our fellows got over, an absolute hellish rifle and machine gun fire was opened on them. They fairly dropped, and it was a vile sight. But the dust soon got too thick for us to see further than 30 or 40 yards from the trench. We who had to stay behind could only listen and hope.
And it's just awful that people in no man's land are being slaughtered. So this is the 88th Brigade, and they're attacking between Gully Ravine and Krithia Nullah. Look at your maps, you'll see where it is. And they did reach the Turkish front line in places, but it's always the same, isn't it? It's the counterattacks. Even if you get the front line, you've got to be able to hold it when the counterattacks come in. But you're marooned the other side of no man's land. And this is Brigadier General Douglas Cayley, and he's commanding 88th Brigade. And this is his review. And it's so dry, but I want people to think about what it's like being the troops he's talking about. He says this: exactly at zero, the first waves went most gallantly over the top, straight for their objectives, and were followed by the succeeding waves. I think 3 waves in all for each battalion. To follow the attack from left to right, the 1st Essex apparently at first met with little hostile fire and gained the front enemy trench without much difficulty. It was found to be very deep and partly closed in, really the front trench of a regular redoubt. A few men got in and a bombing fight ensued, but no real entry could be made, and heavy fire was brought to bear on the men outside. A lodgment was made in our extreme left of the trench for a time by men who had advanced from the various bomb saps. But after a time they were counterattacked out, and the remnants of the regiment fell back to our trenches. What he means is, in, straight back, out. Failure. Nothing achieved. The second Hants, he goes on to say, took on from the right of the Essex. Their left-handed about the same distance to go, but the distance rapidly increased towards their right. They were met with the heaviest fire, and in spite of greatest determination, I could never hear of one of them reaching or entering the Turkish trenches. Slaughtered in no man's land. The 4th Worcesters, he goes on to say, on the right hand, had the furthest to go. The battalion on their right never seemed to get forward at all, so their flank was exposed from the first, in spite of heavy losses. They, however, managed to get forward, and a good many of them got into the enemy's trenches. What happened there, I do not know, but they were probably in small groups and were counterattacked and captured in detail. In that open ground, very few of the remainder got back by daylight. So the same story as the first. Got across, got slaughtered, when they trapped, cut off, and marooned. And we will come to this with the next day's attack, because that's what the story of David Melling is. David? Yes, David Melling. How many casualties? Well, Gary, you know how many?
There were 2,000 casualties suffered.
So 600-700 dead. And I want people... We know how painful, how cruel the losses were, say, at the neck, which is about 250, 300 dead. I just want you to realise that it's not a competition. That it's not. But they're not the only people suffering here. The British here are getting slaughtered, absolutely slaughtered, to provide a diversion for the greater good. Now, here there's and the reason I mention the neck is there's an officer at the neck, Colonel White, forgotten his name. The colonel of the light horse goes over with his men, is killed within seconds. And there's always this thing, it's should he have stayed back and then organised his men, he'd perhaps been able to stop the second and third waves. Well, he was a very brave man, and he made the decision he did, and we've got to respect that decision. But here there's an occasion where General Bouvard de Lille, who was commanding the 29th Division, orders the 86th Brigade to go forward and complete the task. And Lieutenant Guy Geddes, now he was a captain on the 25th of April during the landings. He's now the colonel commanding the 1st Munster Fusiliers. And they were moved up, and they were meant to attack at 22:30. But when he gets to the front, he just sees the Worcesters, there's corpses everywhere, the trenches are blocked. He can't get his battalion forward in anything like good order. What does he do? Does he follow orders, or does he risk his whole career? Well, you're going to read his quote, aren't you, Gary?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that he saw, he judged it to be a futile gesture, and he acted upon that. He goes on to say, "The chaos is indescribable. I have only 50 men of my battalion with me. I cannot state when I shall be ready to attack. The firing line is subjected to heavy rifle and machine gun fire. The left of the Worcestershires is uncertain. I have informed the Dublins I am not ready to attack, and not to do so till I inform them that I am."
And did that work?
Well, the attack was cancelled. I mean, that is a very bold position for a lieutenant colonel to adopt, frankly. But he probably saved his battalion to fight another day.
And a very new colonel. He'd only just been promoted. So it is very brave. And I compare it to another hero of ours, our mutual hero, Malone, who, when he was on Rhododendron Ridge, was ordered to attack on the morning of I think it was the 8th, was it? I can't remember. So, anyway, he was ordered to attack. I think it was the 7th, coming back to me. He was ordered to attack, and he refused because it was hopeless. He didn't mind attacking. He just wasn't going to attack when it's hopeless. Brave man. Moral courage. The colonel of the light horse demonstrated physical courage in many ways. These men demonstrate moral courage. I admire them all in many ways. Overall, how would you describe this 85th millionth attack on Krithia?
An absolute failure, I think, is how I would describe it.
So you'd be expecting the next day's attack by the 42nd Division to be cancelled, I expect.
Oh, absolutely.
Are you going to tell me that's what happened, Gary?
No.
Oh.
There was some optimistic reports about what had happened on the first day. There was no foundation in reality, but they were latched upon, and the second day went ahead.
Well, let's look at the grim reality. This is another quote from Hayward. This is a chastening and horrible quote, isn't it, Gary?
Yeah. Second Lieutenant Hugh Hayward, 1st 6th Manchester Regiment, 42nd Division. 1 or 2 wounded began to crawl in. One poor fellow crept back very slowly under a heavy fire and rolled fainting into our arms over the parapet. When we came to clean him, we found he had 3 huge holes in his stomach, and half his insides were outside.
Half his insides were outside. Just all the tubing and all the rest of it. They gave him 5 field dressings, and to sort of try and staunch the flow. Morphine to try and stop the pain, and then sent him back on a stretcher. Do you think he'd have lived?
No, not with that sort of wound.
No penicillin. Your guts, everything mingled in. It's a bad prognosis for the lad. It's a horrible end. Does it work as a diversion, that first attack? We've discussed it in its own terms in the sense of as an attack to try and gain Achi Baba. But it was a diversion. Did it work?
No, I think one of the issues is that the Turks remained in their positions. There was no counter attack, and more to the point, General von Liman was so confident of the ability of his Hellas divisions to withstand any further attacks that he ordered the reserve 4th Division, which was based at Seraphim Farm, to march towards Anzac, which he did as early as the 7th of August. So
it's not working, is it? But in we go again. This is just madness. So now the 127th and 125th Brigades of the 42nd Division, they'll attack along Krithia Spur. come what may, it's going to go in. It's another diversionary attack. And the preparatory barrage, that opens at 08:10. Again, Hayward's machine guns are creating a sort of rain of bullets. This is a tactical move. They're using machine guns in quite an offensive manner here. They're providing a rainstorm of bullets onto vulnerable points. Vulnerable points being pinch points, communication trenches, just areas where they think they can catch you. A storm of bullets falling down. So what does this is again Second Lieutenant Hugh Hayward, 1st 6th Manchester. So what does he say this time, Gary?
The only difference was that the Turk hardly replied at all. It lasted till 9:40, and the job for which my machine gun section had been detailed was to fire for the last half hour, i.e. from 9:10 to 9:40, at aiming marks which we had previously put up and set so as to carry us onto certain of the Turkish trenches. The object was to try and get any Turks who might be being sent up to support the firing line. In the half hour, the 3 guns got through about 6,000 rounds. So I hope we did some damage. At 9:40, the line changed and got a dreadful time from shrapnel and the enemy's machine gun and rifle fire.
Charged, not changed. Sorry. Oh. Those glasses are
so... Sorry, these my brand new glasses.
Your brand new glasses are ace, Gary.
We could see the line being simply mown down. It was a very nerve-trying sight. And the other thing to think about 6,000 rounds in half an hour, followed by the comment, I hope we did some damage.
It's amazing. So now let's move to attacking across no man's land on Krithia Spur. Always a favourite place for people to die. It's awful. It's a bare open spur. The Lancashire Fusiliers are going forward, 125th Brigade, and this is Private David Melling, 1st 8th Lancashire Fusiliers again. Now, what we're going to do now is go into this was the set of quotes which were found for us and brought to our attention by lovely Jim, that we're going to use it in a sense to tell the story, and we're going to comment in between them and try and say what we think is happening, how we feel about this. So Gary, you're going to read the quotes, and then we're going to chat together about each stage of it.
We were on the ledge of our trench, waiting to spring over and rush at the Turks. Our officer was standing by us, looking at the watch on his wrist, and a terrible strain it must have been. 2 minutes to go, he said, and we waited. 1 minute to go, said the officer next time he spoke. Then, at 10 o'clock, over, he shouted, and that's all I remember of what he said. He may have said more, but I can't tell. Over was the order, and over we went. We all cheered, and then we went helter-skelter for the Turks with the bayonet.
Now, we both got a feeling déjà vu when we hear this sort of account, because this is what we call the generic waiting for the overtop. We have it with the Murray on the 4th of June podcast. It's the countdown, isn't it? 5 minutes to go, 4 minutes to go. And the countdown, the first day of the Somme, I did a book about that one, so I remember 3 or 4 of them have this countdown. It's so important to them because they're counting down the last minutes of their lives. It really, really matters. They never, ever forget it. And then of course, there's the moment of truth. This is over. Off they go. So what does David Melling say next, Gary?
He goes on to say, they were said to be 250 yards away, but it was a lot more than that. At any rate, it seemed so. And the ground we had to rush over was terrible, rough and with a lot of vines about that twined around your feet and tripped you up. Some of our chaps were knocked flat in this way. Some fell of exhaustion, and lots were killed or wounded. The best part of our lot were knocked out before we ever got near the Turks.
And you can understand, can't you, how 250 yards must have seemed a lot longer. I mean, 250 yards is quite a way to try and get across quickly, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, even if you were able to run fast and you weren't in full kit, you're still talking 40, 50 seconds, of exposure, and it's going to be slower in your kit, and you're nervous, and people are falling, and he makes mention there about the vines around your feet, so you're tripping up, and it must have been bloody awful.
People going down, you don't know what's happening to them. Not a lot of artillery fire. Oh, this is something to remember. It's small arms fire. So David Melling makes it, doesn't he? He gets to the Turkish front line.
Yeah, and he says, when we reached the trench that we were going for, we found that there were not many of the Turks left. Our gunners had settled them so that the trench was full of dead Turks, some of them with their heads blown completely off. I saw that part of it had been blown up. I rushed at the opening and fell into the trench. I was alone. I don't know whether I was the first man in the trench or not, but I do know that there were none of our chaps there, only myself and dead bodies. I scrambled to my feet, and the first thing I noticed near me was a Turkish officer, wounded and unarmed. There we were, the two of us, the Turk looking at me and me looking at him. I had my bayonet, and I could have settled him or taken him prisoner, but British soldiers don't touch unarmed men, and I was too busy to take him, and a man who is by himself doesn't, as a rule, make prisoners.
Now, I found this, we both found this a bit strange, this part of the story. There are a few things that are quite interesting. Firstly, British soldiers do touch unarmed men, and I actually believe there's a case of somebody getting it in the back from this same bloke, not seconds after this. I don't know. It seems a strange element in the story. One thing I want to make clear is that not everything in a personal experience account is always true. And people get things wrong or I mean, you sort of presume things are true, but sometimes there are strange things. And this whole Turkish officer, why would you leave a Turkish officer?
And and he would try to arm himself if he saw a British soldier armed approaching him. It's just very odd. And it gets even more odd because David Melling goes on to say, I was looking to see which way to go and to get to our other chaps. And the Turkish officer, noticing this, motioned down the trench to the left to show me where they had gone.
Now, all I'm going to say, I'm not saying he's not telling the truth, because I'm not. But what I mean is, we know the trench is full of dead Turks. There are rifles, therefore, all round the trench. They may have been smashed, I fully understand that. But there are rifles, there are weapons. Why would you turn your back on this Turkish officer and go down the way he'd pointed you to go? Well, I'm sure when he went down this way that he found his own lads straight away, did he?
Yeah, so he's bear in mind, he's all on his own, and he darts off down the trench, and David Benning says, I came face to face with a Turk who was coming from the opposite direction.
What a surprise.
He seemed to be mad and made a lunge at me with his bayonet, but it was broken and no good to him. I saw that and turned to run away.
No, he saw that.
He saw that and turned to run away. As he did so, I bayoneted him in the back and he fell. I could have shot him, but my magazine was empty, for I had been firing a lot. I passed the Turk and then I found our chaps. It was a joy to be back with my chums.
So you see the confusions. Who has he been firing at? He's not mentioned. Oh, the trench was empty when he got there. He hadn't fired at the Turkish officer. You wouldn't fire while you were running across no man's land. There are inconsistencies in this story. It doesn't mean it's not true. But
it doesn't mean it's as he remembers it. It's he's using names like the Turk seems to be mad. Yes,
I'd be a bit cross.
He's fearful for his life, and he makes a lunge at him with his bayonet. Yes, but that think about the juxtaposition with his experience with the officer, not 2 minutes earlier. It's just so different.
It's interesting. And again, I emphasise, what we're doing is, this is what all historians, personal experience historians have to do. You have to look at a story and see the parts of it. You don't put it out because this is what a man has remembered. But I wonder if there's some sort of incredibly traumatic experience going to come up to this chap that might have made him not entirely clear as to what's happened before. Let's see in the account, shall we? So he's very happy. He's found his mates.
Yeah, he's back with his mates. But that doesn't last very long because he says, we were ordered to line the trench. I don't know who gave the order, but it wasn't an officer. I was the end man of the line, and we were firing hard when a bullet came. And all I knew was that I could not see and that I was lying on the floor of the trench with one of our chaps bandaging me. I don't know who it was. I was left there while they went on firing. I don't know how long I was lying there, but I was terribly thirsty and drank 2 bottles of water, my own and one I took from a dead man near me. I could not see him, but I felt by groping about his equipment that he was a British chap. There were not enough of our men to hold the trench, and they were forced to retire and leave me.
Now, this is, this doesn't, because we know what happens to this chap. So now I feel we're on firmer ground here. We're on much firmer ground as to what's happening. I cannot imagine what this man felt like. Can you?
No, I mean, he's again blinded and alone, and he's in the Turkish position.
And he knows his mates have gone. If he was alone before...
He's definitely alone now.
And he knows the Turks are coming. What do you think the Turks would do? And this is not because they're bad people, but what do troops do when they find wounded enemy?
Generally, they finish them off.
Because they haven't got time to look after them. Is it evil? I don't know whether it's evil or not. What I do know is it's what you can expect to happen. So do you think he was scared?
I think he'd be very scared. And he goes on to say, the Turks came up in the trench. And bear in mind, he's blind. And I heard them shouting something like, "Garah, Garah," though it may have been Allah, Allah. They were fearfully excited. And I thought it was all up with me then. I never gave myself any hope. The Turks were running about the trench looking for our chaps. They ran over me, no doubt thinking I was dead. I was lying on my side with my hands covering my head, holding the bandages to stop the blood from coming out. I had to do that because it was only a field dressing. I knew then that I had lost my eyes. I felt as if all the bones in my body were broken with the Turks running over me and stepping on me. After some time had passed, the Turks settled down a bit, not being so excited, and then they began to search the trench and examine the bodies of men in it. Seeing that I was not dead, they propped me up and began searching my pockets. They were talking away, but of course I could not understand them. They were not rough just then, but they were afterwards, when I was being led out. They took my pay book and photographs and everything I had.
Now, this is it. Again, it's interesting because what we were talking about is the first moments. You've recaptured your trench. That's when you're going to finish off the wounded. But it's interesting. Once there's been a bit of time pass, the Turks had settled down a bit, weren't so excited, and then the reversion to sort of almost human being again. So they find the bloke. The words when he said, "That's when I realised the eyes had gone." I mean, I don't know what it must have been like, but you could see there's a settling down of the situation, and the Turks, they may have treated him roughly later, but they do take him prisoner and see to it he eventually gets medical attention. This is a very long story, and it can be read elsewhere, and we'll put a reference to the book that this comes from up on the on Facebook and Twitter. But what an account that is! It's an amazing account, and thank you very much to Jim for drawing it to our attention. And do look out for his book. Anything done by Dave, but don't forget the title: Hell and Confusion, Gallipoli Day by Day.
Had you forgotten the title?
I've forgotten the title, yeah. I just had to look, Gary. Oh, God. Oh, thank you. There's nothing left unturned to embarrass each other in these podcasts, is there? Right, so now, thank you for reading that. Now, in the second wave of the attack, we've got another account, just to show other people. This is Private Arthur Kay. He was with the first 7th Lancashire Fusiliers, and he doesn't fare much better, really. He says this: "Suddenly the guns ceased, and afterwards we heard the shouts of our boys over the parapets. Some of them did not run a yard before they were hit. Our C Company advanced. We suffered the worst," he was in C Company, "for the Turks were ready for us. I'm sure I was half mad when I saw my mates dropping as I was running. I did not get to their trench, for I was hit through the neck. A narrow shave for me. It came right through. The blood spurted out, of course. I dropped down but managed to crawl back to our old trench. I rolled into the trench. One poor fellow was moaning. He'd been hit in the back with shrapnel. You could have put your arm through the hole it made. I got his field dressing and did the best I could for him, whilst I myself was growing weaker." It's a story of considerable courage and trying to look after his friend, well, not his friend, but his comrade, while he himself was in a lot of trouble. Being shot through the throat is not a small thing, Gary.
But being shot through the throat is not normally fatal, because obviously there's no vital organs in there.
Except for the jugular. Or whatever it is,
yeah,
carotid.
You've got to be pretty unlucky.
Yeah, yes, it's a small area, isn't it?
That's why I said not normally, people.
I now see why you said that. Now let's go on. There's a over to the on the right is the vineyard or vineyard. I've never really known which it is.
Vineyard.
Yeah, vineyard. But now it's near the road, and if you're in Gallipoli, you can see it. There's a signpost, isn't it? It tells you where it is. And here there was some vicious fighting. This is where the fighting at Hellas descends into. You know, they're trying to take Istanbul. They can't. To do that, they have to take get the control of the Straits. To do that, they have to take Kiled Bahir. To do that, they have to take Achibaba. To do Achibaba, on the way, they have to get Krithia. To do that, now they're arguing in the vineyard about 1 or 2 trenches. They are now scrapping to try and get a corner of the vineyard. And this is where we meet one of the great heroes of Gallipoli, and this is Captain or Lieutenant. Well, let's go for Captain William Forshaw of the 1st 9th Manchester Regiment, 42nd Division, and I'm going to be him because I feel particularly like him today. And he says, I and about 20 men were instructed to hold a barricade at the head of the sap. Facing us were 3 converging saps held by the Turks, who were making desperate efforts to retake this barricaded corner, and so cut off all the other men in the trench. The Turks attacked at frequent intervals along the 3 saps from Saturday afternoon until Monday morning, and they advanced into the opening with the objective of storming the parapet. They were met by a combination of bombing and rifle fire, but the bomb was the chief weapon used by both the Turks and ourselves. And he's been an inspiring leader of his men, is Forshaw. Beside him, somewhere near, at the head of this sap, was a Sergeant Harry Grantham, also 1st 9th Manchester Regiment. And you're going to read the quote from him, aren't you, Gary?
There were all sorts of bombs, round bombs and bombs made out of jam tins and filled with explosives and bits of iron, lead, needles, etc. It was lively while it lasted. We could see the Turks coming on at us. Great big fellows they were, and we dropped our bombs right amidst them. Captain Forshaw was at the end of the trench. He fairly revelled in it. He kept joking and cheering us on, and was smoking cigarettes all the while. He used his cigarettes to light the fuses of the bombs, instead of striking matches. Keep it up, boys, he kept saying. We did, although a lot of our lads were killed and injured by the Turkish firebombs. It was exciting, I can tell you.
Now, these bombs are quite interesting. They're not really that lethal. They're not like a Mills bomb, the 36 hand grenade, which you may have been trained on in the 1970s. It stayed in the British Army a long, long time.
Well, there was no fragmentation because they didn't have the casing that exploded out.
So they've just got the bits of crap inside it, which is damaging. But you have to be fairly close to them. And you get a lot of spattering, a lot of minor wounds, cuts, sometimes hundreds of cuts. They could be nasty. And this is another quote from you. You're going to read Lance Corporal Thomas Pickford. He's, again, 1st 9th Manchester. He's also with Forshaw in this disputed barricade.
Are you choosing me for all the Manchester quotes because of my fine Manchester accent?
Yes, I've been impressed by the Manchester.
Yeah.
So I'm doing the British officer who obviously doesn't have an accent.
No, absolutely. So Lance Corporal Thomas Pickford. Bombs were bursting all around us. Some of the boys in their excitement caught the Turkish bombs before they exploded and hurled them back again. They did not always manage to catch them in time, and 3 of them had their hands blown off. What made the position worse was that as soon as we had entered the trench, a bomb laid out 6 of us. I was one of them. I bandaged up my leg, bandaged the others, and sent them back. I carried on.
Brave chap. This business of catching bombs, because of course they've got a 6-7 second fuse. You can do it, but if you make a mistake, you've got very short amount of time, and it will blow your hand. We've just said how they're not particularly lethal. They are if you've got them in your hand.
Yeah.
They'll blow your hand off.
Yeah.
There was one case, there's a very similar case at Hill 6, just a little diversion. During a similar VC, Throstle, the Australian VC, we've stood where he was fighting. And it's the thing of a bloke, Sid, his name was, I've forgotten his surname, Ferrell, I think, and he was thrown, and he had his hand blown off, and he threw them with his left arm. These men are very, very brave. There's Thomas Pickford, you were just reading his quote. He's wounded in the leg. He sorts everyone else out and he carries on himself. This is back to Forshaw. Now, the first 9th Manchesters are relieved, but Forshaw understands the position. He knows what's happening. He's got a grip of it, so he stays on to make sure that they don't make some mistake in the handover. And he says this: I was far too busy to think of myself or to think of anything. We just went at it without a pause while the Turks were attacking. And in the slack intervals, I put more fuses into bombs. I cannot imagine how I escaped with only a bruise from a piece of shrapnel. It was miraculous. The attacks were very fierce at times, but only once did the Turks succeed in getting right up to the parapet. 3 attempted to climb over, but I shot them with my revolver. All this time, both our bomb throwing and shooting had been very effective, and many Turkish dead were in front of the parapet and in the saps. The attack was not continuous, of course, but we had to be on the watch all the time, and so it was impossible to get any sleep. Fortunately, we had no fewer than 800 of those bombs, but we got rid of the lot during the greatest weekend I have ever spent. So, now, I want to look at this because that's pretty brave sounding, and also that's the greatest weekend, you know. The greatest weekend I've ever spent.
Well, he clearly never been to Blackpool.
Oh, well, not obviously not, or indeed not.
Or Clacton or any of the other great seaside resorts.
No, but what a thing to say. So you'd imagine he's completely insouciant, and this has had no effect on him whatsoever. He's just a brave man, and it's as if it's water off a duck's back to him, is it? Or is it? Is it? Does it have an effect on Forshaw? And you're going to be Lance Corporal Samuel Bailey, who was the first 9th, and he talks about it. Yeah, I think he stays with the captain.
Myself, a few men and the captain held a trench which was almost impossible to hold, but we stuck it like glue. In spite of the Turks attacking us with the bombs, I can tell you I accounted for a few Turks. Our captain has been recommended for the VC, and I hope he gets it because he was very determined to hold the trench till the last man was finished. But we did not lose many. Our captain has not got over it yet, but it is only his nerves that are shattered a bit.
Nerves are shattered, eh?
Yeah, I think that's an understatement, isn't it,
yeah.
Really?
He's Forshaw clearly. So he was known as the cigarette VC, and there's pictures that you always see him with a cigarette, because that's what he used to light the bombs. A very, very brave young officer, making the difference. And the men who stayed with him, the NCOs and the men who stayed with him, very brave men making the difference. But what are they fighting for, Gary? Is it some crucial thing that will decide the fate of the Gallipoli campaign? Or is it a corner of the vineyard?
Well, yeah, you mentioned it earlier, Peter. It's approximately 200 yard long by about 100 yard wide section of the vineyard.
It's just almost nothing, isn't it? The whole vineyard is just that. And they're fighting about a small bit of it. The corner, I think, top left-hand or top right-hand corner. It's just ridiculous. Now, the Turks, however, what do you think they do now? Do they say, well, we've beaten them off? Or
yeah, they go and have a cup of tea, don't they?
Or do they counter-attack?
Counter-attack, Peter.
And then counter-attack, and then counter-attack, and then counter-attack. This, then, is a chance for revenge, I would suppose. It's an unpleasant word, isn't it? But those British troops in the front line, as the Turks come over, and most of all, the gunners. Now, here we've got... People often forget there's not much space for artillery at Anzac. And the 1st Field Artillery Brigade, the Australians, so the 1st Field Artillery Brigade, they'd stayed at Anzac. They'd stayed at Helles. Because for a long while, they weren't there. And this is a quote from Corporal Ralph Doughty, 2nd Brigade Battery, 1st Field Artillery. And I'm going to read this one. And this is what he says, talking about these counterattacks. Heavy fighting all day. Heavy fighting all day. A few No. A few monitors with 14-inch guns came up and helped to paint the landscape hideous. What a phrase, paint the landscape hideous. Towards evening, the Turks attacked in massed formation. Every available gun was turned onto repelling them, which they did with terrible effect. Not one Turk succeeded in getting within striking distance of our firing trench. The shrapnel just tore long lanes in the advancing lines, and once their well-planned came to, and their well-planned attack came to a sticky end. Fighting all night. The next day, very hot day. Heavy fighting up in the infantry trenches all day. Chaz and I, up to the first line this afternoon, had a good screw around. An unfortunate Australian express. He means they had a look round. They were looking for bits and bobs to steal. Battlefield debris, not from their comrades, but just things they could get. The heaviest fighting during the last 4 days has been in a vineyard. The vines are trampled down and torn about with HE and shrapnel and interspersed with bodies. Our fellows got it pretty heavy in one corner, that's what we're talking about, but Johnny Turk got it hot too. And the whole thing about how many more of these futile attacks, how many times are they going to batter their heads against the Turkish defences? How many more men on both sides are going to die before they realise?
And you've got to remember, this is supposed to be a diversion. This is not the main attack. This is supposed to be just a diversion, pinning down some Turkish forces, stopping them from reinforcing up at Anzac.
And how much did it cost? Well, the fighting goes on till the 13th of August. And the casualties, the British lose in all 3,300 in these attacks. So taking it as being a third dead, that's over 1,000 dead. The Turks they have attributed 7,500 casualties. This is in their counterattacks. It's not in the actual British attacks. It's their counterattacks. I think that figure is, as so often, exaggerated. I'd be surprised if it was that many.
And what use is a vineyard to either side?
This isn't tactics. It's just sort of manslaughter. It's just neglect. Now, Gary, had this second attack had this been a successful diversion?
At this point, Peter, you're expecting me to say no, and I'm going to say no. It was awful. It's a complete and utter failure. And, as a result, our good friend General von Nimmen had the confidence to order another of his hellish divisions, the 8th Division, to march north in support of the Turks at Anzac. So absolutely nothing was achieved.
I find the August attacks at Helles very chastening, very depressing. The losses, the sense of loss, the lives on both sides, all those Turks dead, all those British dead, and I just cannot see a legitimate military reason for it. I think the attacks were doomed. I think as a diversion, it was a complete failure. And yet, it's hindsight, but also beforehand, you could see the Turkish positions were sufficiently strong. It wasn't going to pin any Turkish troops there because what they got there. The focus of the Gallipoli story, the main fighting had been at Helles, hadn't it? But now the focus does switch to the August offensive, and perhaps we'll return in later podcasts to discuss those attacks, the Lone Pine, also diversion, but the left hook out of Anzac, and of course the Suvla landings we'll be talking about. But just a moment's thought about poor David Melling, prisoner of the Turks now, no eyes, blind for life, not blind for life. All those poor people. Wounded, that poor bloke with that awful phrase, his insides were outside, and all for nothing. It's a terrible story, and it's a bit of a depressing way for us to finish this podcast. Don't feel much like laughing about it, to be honest, Gary.
No, and bear in mind for the people there on the ground, it was a never-ending story. There was no end in sight to this. We talk about the evacuation in other podcasts later to follow this, but the guys on the ground saw no end to this.
How are they going to get away? Evacuation was perceived as being impossible, and there's a very good book coming out about that. But we'll draw that because this is serious. We'll forget all that stupid advertising. The point is, this is how are they going to get away? They're trapped at Helles. They're trapped at Suvla and Anzac. They can't get at Chibaba. They must know they can't. There's no room for manoeuvre. They're doomed, it seems like. August is just a hellish month at Helles. Cheers, Gary.
Thanks, Pete.